The following is an interview that Sarah and I did with Rek Kwawer of MadWorc of Madison, Wisconsin. MadWorc is a 501c3 nonprofit cooperative. As the website says, MadWorc promotes worker ownership and democratic workplaces in Wisconsin, supports the creation, development, and growth of democratic workplaces organized as worker cooperatives. They provide peer support and mentoring to new and existing worker cooperatives through monthly meetings, public outreach, and voluntary support. Their vision is a peer support network with outreach trainings and social events to ensure the sustainability of each cooperative and the cooperative community. In addition to much other work, over the years, MadWorc has expanded their support to new worker cooperative development. We are grateful that Rek joined Sarah and I to have this early morning interview. It might be obvious to some of the audience that we had just rolled out of bed that morning. The interview is chock full of interesting history and fresh developments in the worker cooperative world that are relevant to Chicago, the Midwest, and across the country. After delving into what MadWorc is, we talked about the Worker Co-op Solidarity Fund, Co-op Connection Network, and some of the intersections of incarceration and worker cooperativism. As we wound down the interview, we touched upon a trade school class MadWorc is busily involved in. We hope to interview Madison and Wisconsin worker cooperatives in the future, so let this video be a teaser of what the future may hold. Meanwhile, check out madworc.org to see worker co-op affiliates, new potential relationships, to get inspired and to shift your consumption where that empowers you and your communities. This episode ends with an experimental announcement section that Gromke and I pulled together. If this interview and the announcements are of value to you, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell. Thank you. Would you like to start us off with an offering for listeners? It's something like positive for people to take out into the world.
I really now want to offer the millstone story, but I don't think I remember it well enough to say it. I'll try. I'll do my best. I might butcher it and people will be like, that's not how the story goes. So the co-op I lived in Boston was called Millstone, and it got its name from a story about a town where there was one owner of the millstone and everyone had to bring their grain to be processed through the one owner. And something happened at some point and people got together and smashed the millstone and took control over their own grain processing. And the story is that apparently from that day on, everyone wore a piece of the millstone around their neck.
Whoa.
As like a symbol of having taken back their own ability to process their own grain and not to have to pay whatever a single person owning the millstone wanted. So I feel like that story relates to a lot of different kinds of co-ops. Like we were a housing co-op, but it feels just as relevant to worker co-ops, producer co-ops, any kind of movement that's about taking back power. And then the importance of remembering in an ongoing way that that's what we've done. That it's not just we took it back, it's like we need to be conscious of it all the time, that this is something that we worked for and that we won.
And feel the weight of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how much millstone people were carrying around their neck, but that's that's pretty serious.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
I mean, it's an amazing thing, but it's also a burden to have to be responsible for ourselves as a community. It's not like a light burden. It can be a heavy burden at times. It can also be a really wonderful burden. Mm-hmm. But it is something that is definitely, you carry it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems like it might be a good transition for you to tell us a little bit about MadWorc and what you find there in terms of a meaning and like kind of carrying that.
Yeah, so MadWorc is Madison Workers Cooperative, which is a nonprofit cooperative, which is something that's possible in Wisconsin. We're incorporated as a cooperative in Wisconsin, and then we have our 501c3 status through the IRS. And it is Madison's peer network for worker cooperatives. it was formed by member owners at worker cooperatives people started meeting in around 2009 and incorporated in 2012 for the first time. And the real goal was to build power as worker cooperatives and build solidarity as worker owners, to be able to have a place to talk about things that don't necessarily come up when you talk to other people about other jobs. If you're in the same industry, you can talk about like industry related things, but not the worker ownership piece. And so there's a real sense that there's a community of worker co-ops, and that as worker co-ops, we need to support each other in success, that like it's not a competition. It really is like a mutual success building thing, that it's not enough for like one co-op to thrive. They all need to be succeeding and thriving. And that does feel very different than other models of organizing, where there's a lot more of a like, who's going to win? That means somebody needs to lose. So MadWorc is still around and kicking after, I guess, 13 years after people started meeting. And it represents about half of the worker co-ops in Madison, I would say. Well, it had been representing a little more than half, and we've had a lot of co-op development in the last few years due to the city's initiative to develop more worker co-ops. I would say right now, MadWorc encompasses about a third of the worker co-ops in Madison. But it's open to all of them. And each co-op gets to send a representative to our board, and decisions are made basically as they would be in a co-op, right? With everyone bringing their opinions and their expertise and their thoughts and their hopes, and then putting that all together and trying to come up with what works for the group. And we've been really trying hard lately to have more opportunities for engagement that aren't just meetings, because we know that not everyone loves meetings. And of course, it's hard because the people who are at the meeting are the ones who are like, what do people do besides meetings? We've started holding like a social every month, just like a very low key opportunity for people to stop by and meet other worker owners, talk about co-ops or talk about completely different things. There's no agenda, there's no requirements, right? If you like show up and someone else there is like wearing your favorite band's t-shirt, there's nothing to be like, oh no, we're here to talk about co-ops. It's like, yeah, great, talk about your favorite band. Like you're still building a relationship with somebody from another co-op, right? That like those relationships are really important. I think that comes through too in like our annual regional rendezvous. We really prioritize trying to build relationships at those. Even when we've done them virtually, trying to build in like some opportunities for people to just have conversations, trying to build in just like interactive sessions and not like lectures or like big names speaking without any opportunity for interaction. We actually were looking into doing a hybrid option, and somebody was like, oh, it's really easy. You just put like a microphone next to the speaker and like a webcam on them and like have someone read out the questions that come in. We're like, oh, that is not our model of a conference. Like that, yes, that would work if we had like a speaker who we were trying to get people to all listen to one speaker. But our model really has been the content is generated by the people who are involved in the community, and the expertise is generated by the people who are involved in the community, right? That like in this room, we have a lot of people with a lot of information. So let's share that information and let's build from there, rather than having somebody who isn't from our community come in and say like, here's what works and here's what doesn't work. So anyway, that's getting a little off topic from what MadWorc is, but that's one of the things MadWorc does. And MadWorc really has always had a focus on peer networking from the get-go, right? Just from the informal conversations between worker owners. One of our earliest like sort of formalized programs was a board member exchange program, where people from different co-op boards could sit in on other co-op boards. And apparently it was really interesting. A lot of the boards happened to be dealing with some similar issues. So it was right around when there were some changes in the concealed carry laws in Wisconsin. And so a number of co-ops were trying to figure out like, how are we going to deal with concealed carry on our workplace? But also apparently several of them happened to be having like HVAC system issues. So, which is, not at all about like the current political climate that just like happens to be happening. So apparently it was really interesting for people to see like how different co-ops were making these decisions. And for newer co-ops, it was a great way to learn like, how do you make decisions? Because we don't have a lot of models in our world for communal decision making, right? We are very used to like one person in a business makes the decision and we all go along with it. Or it's my decision, so I make it and I write out the consequences. So cooperative decision making is definitely something that is learned. I mean, I think we come to it naturally, but we have to learn how to actually do it as adults. And so I think that was really helpful for some of the newer co-ops too, to like just see like, how are different co-ops making decisions? What kinds of things are they taking into consideration? How are they figuring out who's talking, who's not talking? How are they addressing like unknown questions, right? Like, if we start fixing this, how much will it cost? What if the cost is more? So we've really been trying to build on things like that the whole time, and really trying to like when we've done cooperative development, it's been very much in that sort of way of like, we've never actively gone out and been like, we need to start a co-op that does X, Y, and Z. It's been more like somebody has an idea for a co-op and we work with them to sort of figure out, oh, you know, you're looking for some policies about human resources. Oh, you should look at such and such co-op. Like they've got great stuff. Oh, you're a co-op in this industry. Like there's a co-op that does that in like, I don't know, San Francisco. Like, let's hook you up with them. Yeah, so that's a lot about what MadWorc does and is.
That's so cool. I'm curious about the diversity of types of co-ops that are included in this group.
Yeah, Madison is interesting because we have co-ops in a variety of different sectors. So the co-ops that are most active in MadWorc right now would be the Interpreters Co-op, which is sort of a service-based co-op, like consulting service-based co-op. Union Technology Co-op, which again is service-based. They do like computer security stuff. Union Cab, which is a taxi company, which is huge and also has been through a lot of difficulty even before the pandemic with Uber and Lyft. So they're in an industry that has been really challenged in the last few years. There's a new co-op called Common Good Bookkeeping, which is was developed in part through the city's initiative to develop more worker co-ops. One of the sort of areas that was highlighted as a good need for worker co-ops is like co-ops that can provide services to other co-ops. And bookkeeping is something that a lot of co-ops need.
It's huge.
And having bookkeepers who are familiar with co-op bookkeeping is a huge advantage. So Common Good Bookkeeping has been involved. Isthmus Engineering is an engineering and manufacturing cooperative. They make machines that make machines. So again, we have a really broad sort of like service and like consulting type co-ops. We have transportation, we have engineering and like manufacturing pieces. And then in the past, we've had involvement from Community Pharmacy, which is a full pharmacy and wellness store that's been around for 50 years. And I think at some points Nature's Bakery, which is a bakery that does, most of their work is like wholesale. And at this point, they mostly do veggie burgers and granola, but they've been around for a long time as well. Madison has sort of a few waves of co-ops. And so there's a wave that we're sort of like in the like 40 to 50-year-old range. So really long time businesses. And then there's like sort of a bunch that started around like 2010, 2011. And then there's a bunch of new ones that have just been started in the last couple of years. We've also had involvement from the Wisconsin Natural Heritage Cooperative, which is a really great co-op they have a contract with the Department of Natural Resources. And it was formed by people who were being outsourced to a nonprofit that was not treating them particularly well, doing this outsourced contract to the Department of Natural Resources. And they decided to form a co-op and compete for the contract, and they got it.
Cool.
So they're like in a very, like their customer is the government, and they were able to show that like they could outbid a nonprofit that had been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
That they were in control of, and they got to make the decisions about. So they converted, like, I want to say in like 2011, 2012, sort of right around the like just sort of in the aftermath of the protests in Wisconsin about the killing of public sector unions.
It's exciting just to hear how many different co-ops are like exchanging information in MadWorc, and it also seems like it must be challenging having co-ops with different needs and also of different ages. And I know you shared a little bit about kind of learning over time about how to make decisions, and just considering different all the different needs. I'm just, if there's anything that comes to mind about what you've learned over the years about what helps, or interesting moments in decision making, love to hear about that.
So as you're talking, I'm realizing that I actually don't remember what MadWorc's official decision-making process is, like in our bylaws.
We won't hold it
Because
against
every
you.
decision we've made since I've been there has been by consensus. And so that may be how it is in the bylaws. I'm just not sure. But what that means is that everyone has a say, and it means that the decisions that we make are upheld by everybody. There's not that thing of like, you lost, but you still have to go along with it. It's like, no, we waited until everyone was in agreement about what to do about this situation. And I don't think there's been any blocks to anything since I've been with MadWorc for like 2 years. There have been times where we've put things off and said, we need more information about this. Like, I don't know, choosing a lawyer, like we've talked about it a couple times, but we are waiting until we have more information. But like there was agreement, we want more information before we make a decision. And it wasn't like, oh, we voted on this lawyer and we didn't reach consensus, so now we have to like go back to the drawing board.
Makes sense. I could go down a rabbit hole with talking consensus, but and you said that this is open to anyone to join, like any of the co-ops.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a dues structure in place, which is relatively new. It's always been the intention, but we didn't implement it until recently. But dues are based on wages paid. And so for a smaller co-op, somebody figured out, I'm really bad at reversing percentages, especially since it's like a fraction of a percentage, but somebody figured out you'd have to have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in wages before your dues were more than $100 a year. So for the like smaller and medium-sized co-ops, they're usually paying $100 a year, which is not a huge amount of money, but it makes a difference.
A few things came to mind. But I was looking at the Mad at your website, and I see that there's 2 sections at the top. It says our members and other local co-ops. What's the difference, if you didn't cover that already? I know it seems like you mentioned some of both these categories.
Yeah, so the co-ops that we consider our members are the ones who are paying dues and sending somebody to be part of our meetings. Those are sort of like the 2 ways to participate. And I think we value them both. Like, I think we would be happy to do a dues waiver for somebody who was having a hard time as a co-op and like wasn't able to afford dues. And I think we wouldn't like say you can't be a member if you can't come to our meetings, but we really want both parts of participation. The co-ops that aren't members, a lot of them are newer. And so they're just developing. Some of them may not even have a lot of wages being paid out yet, so they may not have a lot of money coming in to pay dues. They may still be doing a lot of the development piece, and so they may not have the capacity to like send somebody to do something outside of the actual co-op. But we are in communication with them, and I think there are some areas that, like some groups that wouldn't put their non-members on their website. For us, it feels really important too, because again, it's all co-ops together. We can't just like ignore co-ops that aren't members right now. We need them all to thrive. So it's just as important to support co-ops that aren't our members yet. Whether that's because, I mean, we know that some of our co-ops have not always been members just because of capacity issues. That like, especially right now, like there's been co-ops that have been really struggling financially through the pandemic. There's also co-ops have been really thriving. It's been really interesting to see how different businesses do really differently through the same sort of economic situation, right? Like the interpreters co-op has had a huge amount of business, I think partially because it's all remote. And so people can contact them from a much broader variety of places. They don't have to fly them there. They don't have to like pay for lodging, right? They just like, you need 2 hours of interpretation, you can pay for 2 hours of interpretation, and someone will show up on Zoom, do the interpretation, and then you're done. Whereas like, I know that Union Cab really struggled. They lost a lot of people during the pandemic. A lot of people, I think, retired early, or like retired, maybe not early, but earlier than they might have otherwise. And so they are now really trying to rebuild back up to their full numbers. Yeah. And there's been some interesting collaborations between different cooperatives as well, both pandemic and non-pandemic, but like in the pandemic, even like, I know that Union Cab was helping deliver things for community pharmacy. Community pharmacy has patients who are elderly, who have poor health, who really couldn't be going out to pick up prescriptions. So there's definitely been some like collaborations like that where people have really been trying to support other cooperatives, and to support other cooperatives towards supporting the community, right? It's sort of like this multi-part thing of like, there's the principle about cooperation among cooperatives, and there's also the principle about concern for community. And sometimes those can really overlap, that like supporting other cooperatives does support the community too.
That's so cool. I was going to ask about collaborations between the co-ops that you've seen.
That store, I think you said it was Wisconsin Natural Heritage Cooperative, but they basically like they won the contract. That's pretty exciting. That reminds me of something we encountered in Chicago with a union campaign, and it was just so difficult to withstand the repression from the employer. And at some point, some folks are talking about, we should just outbid them, just create another company and outbid them. But I don't think there was really any precedents anybody knew of that really kind of would, gave people the courage to do it. And then the other thing is, where's that infrastructure to like support something like that? And at that time, the union that was helping out, the existing unions, they just didn't have the infrastructure to support that, especially within the independent framework that the workers wanted to go. They had seen some of the business unions, and they were repelled from them. They wanted their freedom as well. So, but this is gonna revive some old conversations and probably rekindle some connections that have been lost.
Definitely. There was a story about Wisconsin Natural Heritage Cooperative in GEO's newsletter. So if you go to the GEO website, there's like a whole interview with them about like the whole process and like why they did it, how they did it. And yeah, I think the union question is a really tricky one, because I think unions could be a really strong ally of co-ops, but don't always know that much about them. But ultimately, I mean, the two can be combined, but ultimately they're both working for getting more worker rights, more worker autonomy, more worker control. But it is hard to launch into the unknown, especially when you're talking about like the unknown is owning or running a business, like that's definitely, there's a lot of risk there. And most of us have not thought about doing it in the past. So it's not like, you know, you just harness your dream. It's like, oh, I didn't think I would ever want to run a business. So how do I even start doing that? And isn't it scary? Don't you have to have a lot of money? There's just a lot of things that have been put in our way about starting businesses, much less running businesses. At the same time, I feel like I've also worked at a lot of places where, like, as employees, we were just as well equipped to run the business as like the owner. You know, like who was doing the buying, who was doing the sales, who was tracking inventory, who was like managing people on the floor. Like it wasn't the owner. Like in some cases, like the owner knew what was going on and was pretty involved, but like I've also worked for places where the owner was like pretty absent and was like, yeah, just run the business. As long as there's profit coming in, I'm happy. So I feel like a lot of us do have skills that we don't always think about. You know, we're like, oh, well, I do my job. It's like, well, right, but your job involves keeping the business going. And if you can keep this business going, you could keep a different business going.
Yeah, people don't make that leap. It's helpful for me to hear that spoken out loud. Like, you have skills. You
I mean, it's a scary leap. We're really trained to have bosses and like to assume that we're going to work for somebody else. But then at the same time, I feel like everywhere I've ever worked, there's people who are like criticizing their bosses and like being like, they don't know what's going on, or like, oh, my supervisor is like totally useless. Like, I do everything. And then like they just present it to their supervisor. Like, so I think we know somewhere in ourselves
deep down
that we have the capacity.
I'm curious, are there ways in which people who aren't part of, if it hasn't been mentioned so far, are there ways that people who aren't part of worker co-ops, but the co-op curious, are there ways for them to like connect with MadWorc or support the worker co-ops, begin their journey?
Definitely. So there's sort of like a few different ways. And sometimes those ways like depend on like, are you interested in co-ops just to support them? Or are you interested in co-ops because you think you might want to be part of one someday? But our socials are open to everyone. And I would say all of our events really are open to, I think we usually describe it as like worker owners and supporters of worker co-ops. There's even our board has a number of seats that are allowed to be filled by people who aren't worker owners, but who are supporting worker cooperation in Madison. Right now, that includes somebody from the city's initiative to develop worker co-ops. It includes someone from the public library who does like their business librarianship stuff. So our socials are a really great way for people to get involved just because it is so informal.
Is there a website that you could direct folks to?
Yeah, our socials are at madworc.org/socials. And they're on the fourth Thursday of the month right now. We also have been running for almost 2 years now, a book club. And that is a place where a number of people who have been involved in the book club aren't current worker owners, but are people who are interested in like economic solidarity work, co-ops. We started out reading Jessica Gordon Nemhardt's Collective Courage. There was a lot of interest in reading that. And so we did that, and that took a while. It's a dense book. And I think for a lot of us, it was a much easier book to read in a book club format. Like, I think I probably would have given up on it on my own, but having people to discuss it with was like huge. And then we moved from there. We read Monica White's Freedom Farmers, which sort of carries on more about some of the legacy of African-American farming cooperatives. And then we sort of like, we're like on this one track, but then we were talking about like organizing. So we read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. So we were like, oh, let's move towards like a little more active organizing, sort of contemporary. And then we read a book called No Bosses that was, interestingly enough, not about worker co-ops at all, like kind of mentioned them as like, oh yeah, it's a thing that happened in Argentina, but it couldn't really work very many other places. Here's some problems. Okay, let's talk about other things. We're all a little bit like, like that kind of missed a big opportunity right there. And then this summer we've been just reading a series of articles. And in the fall, we are hopefully, possibly planning to read, we just found out, I didn't know about this until recently, that Cooperation Jackson has a book. And so we're hoping to read that, but they also have another one coming out in the spring that sounds like it would be even more updated and like more analytical. So we're not sure if we're going to read both or wait till the spring, but we've definitely had a number of people join the book club who, one or two haven't even been in Madison because we've been doing it over Zoom. But also people who are just like, I used to be a worker owner, I work with a like collective organization, I am involved in the university with like environmental activism, like a lot of different things that brought people interested in this topics together. And then our rendezvous is open to everyone too. Like we definitely, basically, I can't imagine any of our events being like only worker owners or like only members of MadWorc. Yeah, we really want to be as open as possible. We've also, the city's initiative to develop worker co-ops is called the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition. And they host a session called Co-op 101 that's mostly been done at the public libraries. And we've definitely had people present at most of those, or like be present to answer questions about MadWorc at most of those. Just so people who are interested in co-ops can get a sense of like what resources there are, that it's not just like, right, because like Madison Cooperative Development Coalition, MCDC, has a lot of resources to get you started. And then what? And so we want to make sure people know from the get-go that there's like continuing resources. It's not just like you get some grant funding and you get some technical assistance and then you're on your own running a business, that there actually is ongoing support.
That sounds really helpful.
Yeah,
unless you had, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, those books is Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. And the other is Jackson Rising, Read the Art. I don't know how to pronounce that word, to be honest. Is it Redux? Redux. Looks French or Latin. So yeah, Jackson Rising, read the, sorry, let me say it again. Jackson Rising, Redux, Lessons on Building the Future in the Present. Yeah, I think those are like important books that people should definitely know about.
Yeah, for sure. On the topic of pronunciation, I've learned that I don't know what the plural of rendezvous is. So I just keep having to like fudge it in grant applications. Like, we've held a regional rendezvous 3 years in a row. Because I don't know how to say, is it 3 regional rendezvouses or?
Find out right now.
I was curious, how does MadWorc, I mean, Chris, please report back, but how does MadWorc relate to the Worker Co-op Solidarity Fund?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think it's easy when there's an organization involved in an initiative for it to seem like it's that organization's initiative. And the Worker Co-op Solidarity Fund is definitely not MadWorc's initiative. I want to be really clear about that because I think it's really important to give credit to the people who are involved, and it's not a MadWorc project. MadWorc is like one of the organizations that has 1 or 2 people going to the meetings, but I would say the MadWorc involvement really is that the idea was largely inspired by someone at one of our regional rendezvous who came from the UK. Well, it was one of the virtual ones. So came from the UK, but not like particularly far. I think they were in their bedroom. And they were talking about, there's a fund in the UK called Solid Fund, which is, I guess we've been saying $1 a week. I guess it's probably like £1 per week and not $1 per week, but they haven't corrected me when I've said $1 per week. So but their fund is basically worker owners through co-ops put in $1 a week per worker. Everyone whose co-op puts in money on everyone whose co-op puts in money on behalf of them is a member. So like if your co-op has 10 people and you put in $10 a week, all 10 of your worker owners are members of Solid Fund. And then they use an online platform, I think it's Lumio, but it might be something different, to make decisions about how to grant out that funding. And so that funding goes out to co-ops, and it just sort of replenishes itself on a weekly basis. But all of the decisions, it sounds like not everyone gets involved in the decision-making process, but everyone has money, who's contributing to the fund, does have decision-making power in it, which is pretty cool. And the idea, I think, is that it's funding that is not, and for one thing, it's not loans, it's just like outright funding. And for another thing, it's democratically decided by other worker owners. So you don't have to try to convince like a grant committee that's never heard of a worker co-op about why your project is worthy. You're talking to other people who are familiar with co-ops, quite likely familiar with your co-op, and know what kinds of questions to ask or what kinds of things to think about in terms of like how funding might really make a difference for a particular co-op. And so there's been a group of us meeting in the US, mostly in the Midwest, although we sort of started with like, what's our geographic scope? And then we were like, what about the Midwest? But then as we've added more people, most of them aren't in the Midwest. So, whatever. But there's been a group of us meeting for the last like little more than a year now, trying to figure out how to start something like that here. And we've really been trying to figure out, do we want to do non-extractive loans or do we want to do grants? And we've also been trying to figure out how to make sure worker owners are involved in that decision. Because some of us who were involved in the beginning are not worker owners. Like some people were, but some people aren't. And so I think there's been a really strong desire to make sure that since worker owners would be the primary people donating to the fund, that we have worker owner interest in creating the fund and making sure that the fund works the way that the people who would be putting in the money would want it to go. So we've definitely made a lot of progress on that recently, I would say. A couple of the folks who've been coming to meetings now who hadn't been coming before are worker owners. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that like is in the spirit of things that MadWorc likes supporting, right? Of like things that help co-ops, but that help co-ops through cooperation and not through like a top-down like approach of, telling people what they should do with the money or controlling what the funds are used for. And I think one of the things that's really cool about it is that like, it's not a huge amount of money, but if we have a lot of people putting in money, it would build up quickly. So it's not unreasonable, I think, for a lot of co-ops to think about putting in $1 per worker per week. But if we had hundreds of co-ops doing that, that becomes a lot of funding really quickly. And also there's a lot of times when co-ops need funds that aren't necessarily huge funds, but it's still funds, like it might be too much hassle to like go through a loan process for like $800. But sometimes that $800 makes a really big difference in fixing equipment or floating through a really rough month or things like that. So I don't know, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm just hoping we can like get more people involved in the planning so that we can have more buy-in when we start collecting funds. Anything you want to add about that, Chris? Because you've also been at those meetings.
Yeah. I really like how people coming in from abroad enriching the experiences and the connections and the possibilities. And that's something that I'm seeing in the Solidarity Fund. It's really cool. It's attracted people who didn't who wanted to talk about this but they didn't quite have the space to. And it just reminds me of the importance of holding space for things. You know, if people, if someone can't do like this big old thing, just helping to hold space is really critical. And you know, and that's kind of what that's what Regional Rendezvous did too. They held the space, and then you have people coming in with all sorts of positive initiatives that communities really need. And that's one real cool thing that I've seen about the Worker Co-op Solidarity Fund, and seeing people come in who aren't in the Midwest, but they don't have anybody else to talk to about this stuff, and they're really involved in building workers power, stuff like that. So I really like the space that's one of the reasons why I really like that space. But also it was just making me think about how in Chicago, we recently, the closest thing that we have to, this is going back to the previous conversation about MadWorc. The closest thing we have to that is something called the Chicago Co-op Convergence. And recently, was it last month or 2 months ago, we met for the first time, because it started during the pandemic. And it was so great to kind of like go outside of the kind of like formal structure, like the formal container, and the conversations that happened from that were like really, really important. And I don't know, I guess that's a theme that I've been thinking about lately and things, is that you know, just having room for flexibility, kind of working outside of containers is kind of really important for people to find like their passions, identify critical needs, and you know, critical enthusiasms too. But yeah, there's a listserv for the Worker Co-op Solidarity Fund, and we're gonna put a link to it in the YouTube description for anybody who wants to get involved. And yeah, ideally, we're definitely trying to attract more worker owners. And if you don't have anybody, if someone wants to get involved, they don't have anybody with whom to talk about this stuff, I think this is a space. It's becoming a space for that as well, which I personally welcome, to help people nucleate, to build the effort in their locality or region where such a thing doesn't exist yet. That's all I got for now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about people coming in from areas that don't have things like that, because I think that is one of the things when we decided to focus on the Midwest. We also said like that while we may not have the capacity to be national yet, we want to support other smaller regional groups in doing similar things, with the idea of sort of maybe building all together. So yeah, I think it again is sort of that like, it's cooperation among cooperatives, like as we build it, you know, it's not like we can be like, oh, here's how to do it. It's more like, come help us figure it out and we'll help you figure it out.
Which is like, yeah, the horizontalism that we need, perhaps. Could we talk about Co-op Connection Network and tell us about that?
Sure. So the Co-op Connection Network is another thing that came out of the 2021 Regional Rendezvous. And I don't remember which session it came out of, but I want to say it was a session about peer networking. But one of the things that came up when I listened to the session, it seemed like one of the things that was coming up was that it's hard to sometimes find out who to talk to at different co-ops. Right, that like some co-ops is really like front and center on their webpage, like contact us, we'd love to talk. And other co-ops are much more difficult to get in touch with. I think some of that just depends on like the industry that they're in, whether they're trying to like get customers from the outside, whether they're more closed off, like. But I think one of the ideas was that it'd be really nice to know who to contact at different co-ops to talk about co-op questions. And so folks began meeting, and one of the really early things that came up was the idea of a map, where people could enter information about their co-op, including things that their co-op is strong at and could help other people with, and things that their co-op could use help with. And so I think the idea is that eventually lots of co-ops will join this map, and then it's a way to look at like what resources different co-ops have and can share, so that co-ops that are looking for information can like easily figure out like, oh, here's 3 co-ops that are really on top of the area that we're really not on top of. Maybe I can just reach out to them, and then you know who to reach out to. It's not just like trying to find a phone number or trying to find an email address and hoping it gets to the right person. It's like on the map, it says the right email address to contact. And so again, it kind of goes to that piece that MadWorc has really supported all along of peer networking, and like really trying to promote development of co-ops from within the co-op movement, and not necessarily relying on like external sources for information. So sort of like using the wisdom that already exists in cooperatives to support other cooperatives. But I think this is going to be cool because it'll be at least on a national level. Who knows, maybe someday international too. And you know, I think we're still talking a lot about like data and privacy and like who has access to what information. But I think, I mean, I guess maybe I'm talking out of line, but I think there's probably agreement that like we want the information to be as easily accessible to worker owners as possible. Whether that's like just worker owners or worker owners plus other people in the public, like I think that's a lot of questions, but I think the idea really is to try to make it easier for co-ops to work together, and have a cool map at the same time.
I think one of the interesting conversations that's happened there is from Jim of Grassroots Economic Organizing, geo.coop. And Jim, he said on multiple occasions that like the vast majority of like anything that exists right now for co-ops was created by peer networks in the past, and that we're kind of in a period where a lot of that energy kind of got lost, of worker co-ops supporting each other, and that we're in a period where a lot of the growth, our future positive growth and like current needs, the way that they're gonna really get satisfied and kind of like take the worker co-op movement to the next level is by getting back to developing these relationships. So I'm excited for what that means, and I think Jim's right. I think Jim's right. And we're gonna also put, there's a listserv for Co-op Connection Network as well, and we're gonna put a link of that in the description. Hopefully, more people are able to join up and share the work in that.
Yeah, or even if people don't want to join the listserv and get involved in the organizing, putting their co-op on the map would be huge, because you know, the more people who are on there, the more useful it is, right? That the more resources you can find on that map, the more people will come to it as one of their like primary steps, rather than like, you know, out of despair or like put it off like, oh, there's probably not going to be very much on there. But like once it's got a lot of information, I think people really will look to it as like a great resource.
Yeah, and as soon as the map is ready, we should put that on as well for people to just get immediate access to.
I think the form might be ready.
Okay. As
I
soon as
think
that's
there
ready.
might be a link to the form, like where you put in your information.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, MadWorc is trying to build up its own internal peer network within Madison too. Like I said, it's something that we've always like, it's always been a really big part of our organization is peer networking. And so we've been really trying to formalize our peer network a little bit more to make it easier for people to get the information that they're looking for. So what we've been trying to do with mixed success, because surveys are hard, but we've been trying to get people to fill out a survey, like not co-ops, but actual people, sharing what information they have and what information they're looking for. And also asking some questions about their co-op so that we can get a sense of like, are there sort of overarching needs in the co-op community? You know, if a lot of people are saying from different co-ops are saying like, we're really struggling with like IT issues, that's something to like look into as a whole group. But also trying to figure out like, what skills do people have? Do people have bookkeeping skills? Do they have conflict resolution skills? Do they have, I don't know what else is on that list. And then what skills are people looking for, with the idea that really like we want to build up capacity within our co-op. So, you know, maybe a co-op already has somebody who's great at bookkeeping, and that's important, but it would be great if there were 2 or 3 people who had experience with bookkeeping. It would be great if everyone in the co-op had a really thorough understanding of how to read financial statements and not just a couple people who sort of like explain it to the other people. And that it's going to strengthen co-ops to have that kind of like multiple people with the same skills. And also it gives people a lot more opportunity for like shifting what kind of work they do, you know, that like maybe you like what you do and maybe you want to do more in the co-op, and gaining different skills opens up a lot more opportunities for doing different things. Or for moving to a different co-op, or for starting your own co-op. Like there's just a lot of possibilities, but so I think that's a big piece of it, is just like skill sharing. But there's also just a relationship building piece, right? That like getting to know someone from a different co-op, you know, maybe you sit down to like talk about financial statements, but you're going to ask some questions about their co-op's finances. You're going to ask some questions about like, who knows what about what information in the co-op. You're going to learn some stuff about a different co-op. You're going to learn some stuff about a different person. And that builds part of the ecosystem, right? That there's the sort of like financial web of ecosystem that's like co-ops purchasing things from other co-ops and getting the public to purchase things from co-ops. But there's also the like relationship piece of an ecosystem that's like building strength between co-ops, where like they don't just exist in bubbles. It's like when you hear that a co-op is struggling, it's not just like, oh, that co-op is struggling, we want to support it because it's a co-op. It's like, oh, I know their person who does, you know, most of their IT stuff, and they're awesome and they're really stressed. So like, let's try to support them. So I think it really does build up a couple of different big pieces of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't know if how much time we spent on it, but I know that in Chicago, the Chai Commons worker co-op, and there's sort of hybrid co-op. They've been working on a map of the solidarity economy here as well, and I think they're trying to figure out how to standardize some of this data so that it's useful for multiple purposes for multiple organizations. I hope it all works out, you know, and people. It's really hard to make like technological shifts, or like if they're different softwares, it's hard to make those shifts. But yeah, that whole standardization seems pretty cool. We're able to pull that off, because there's so much data out there that we don't know of. And then I think, was it Jim recently? He said that a lot of this data is like a holy grail for a lot of co-ops. Because supposedly a lot of funding comes from data, and I feel like there's this implied argument that worker co-ops and co-ops do so much good in communities, but because there's not data to show that, they don't get the funding that they deserve. So yeah, all the data, before I never really thought about data and it didn't really attract me, but now I'm realizing, yeah, this stuff might be really, really important, and to complement the relationships, the in-person relationships.
Yeah, and then the data about worker co-ops is going to be maybe different than some of the other data about like businesses. So the more information we have, the better we can sort of tell a story. Like I know one thing that's come up for me looking for grants for MadWorc is like a lot of the like economic development grants are very like career development focused, right? Like how many individuals will have more career skills as a result of your project? And that's not really what worker co-ops do, right? The goal isn't like, let's get 12 people per 8-week cohort into jobs. The goal is like, let's create jobs that are like worker controlled in worker owned businesses that create like sustainable businesses that aren't going to leave the communities, that are going to contribute back to the communities. So it's sort of like a lot of different information kind of comes together, right? Like there's like that statistic about how much of a dollar spent locally stays local versus like a dollar spent at like a, you know, retail chain that's not local, and how much of that goes away. It's like that's a relevant piece of data, but then like making the connection to why it's also relevant to fund the job development of people. Like it's just a lot of, like the more information there is, the more you can sort of like tell the story of why this is important, because it's not something that a lot of people are familiar with. And so being able to show like, you know, no, we didn't create like 14 individuals with like coding skills, but we created like, you know, 6 more sustainable businesses that aren't going to leave the community and that are going to aim to pay a living wage, because the people deciding about wages are the people making those wages. Yeah, the data piece is really interesting. And I also wish there was more data available. And I think some of it may exist. Like I know that the Federation of Worker Co-ops had a presentation on data at their member meeting, and it sounds like there may be more data than is always published easily, but it's not clear like how to get it or even what it is. But it's hard because it's like, I want to collect data here, but I don't want to like duplicate efforts. And I think that's a big thing with the Solidarity Fund as well, is like, we don't want to duplicate efforts. We don't want to like compete with anybody. We also don't want to like put more energy into something that already exists when we could just like put our energy into the thing that already exists. Which I think is really different in a cooperative realm than in a like traditional capitalist realm, that like data isn't proprietary here. Like it's not like, you know, we need to do a study and someone else needs to do a study and like then we each have our own data. It's like, no, we want the data to be like available to all of us, because it's all of our information. We're not trying to like, you know, what if we got to give out more grants than somebody else gets to give out, then people will like us more and give more money to, like, no, the idea is to get more money to co-ops. However that happens, like if that happens through our fund, that's awesome. If it turns out that there's other funds that are doing a better job of it, I don't think anyone would be like disappointed to try to support those funds. It's like a different sort of end game. Like the end game is like supporting co-ops and not like building up something new just to be something special.
I know that was an interest that we had, was just about considering government grants that go to exploitative and extractive economies in the community, like compared to support for worker co-ops, like what's missing, yes, and how do you feel about it? It's a loaded question, maybe.
Yeah, no, grants are a really hard thing because a lot of people just don't know what worker co-ops are. So like I've definitely gotten a lot of grant rejections that are like, well, that sounds very interesting, but that's not really what we do. And part of me has been tempted to like stop describing the worker co-op part of what we do and to start focusing on the like why we do it. Right, because our mission statement is like about worker co-ops for the purpose of creating racial, economic, and gender justice in our communities. And so sometimes I've looked at grants and been like, what if I just talk about creating like economic justice and gender justice and racial justice? And like sort of allude maybe to the fact that we're doing it through co-ops, but really just focus on like those pieces and like try to get them to fund that. And I'll use worker co-ops to do that. Because there's definitely a number of grants that are like, oh yeah, we fund really progressive causes. And it's like, yes, but what you fund is like organizing work. Okay, well, worker co-ops are organizing. There's a ton of organizing involved in worker co-ops, but it's not like campaign organizing towards like a particular goal, like legislation or something like that. We're creating jobs, but we're not just like feeding into like local industry to like support big businesses that already exist here by like training more people to work for them. Like it doesn't quite fit into a lot of places.
So you're not sending people into the meat grinder and dressing that process up. That's what a lot of that stuff means. It's really disgusting. I've seen that too. So since we have a pro-prisoner bent on this show, what kind of intersections do you see between incarceration and worker cooperativism?
So I'm sure there are people who can speak much more to the existence of co-ops among incarcerated people, but I do know that there are some, and I think it's a really exciting possibility. Both the idea of co-ops within prisons, right, that like prison labor is incredibly exploitative, and if one of the goals of worker co-ops is to create a better economic condition for the people doing the work and more control for the people doing the work, I think there's a lot of potential for co-ops, but also co-ops that are operating both within prisons and outside of prisons can create opportunities for employment for people who are being released from prison, which we know is a huge issue. But I think outside of like prison-based co-ops, there's also just worker co-ops in general have a lot of ability to support formerly incarcerated people, right? That like they're locally owned and worker controlled businesses. So there's not like a corporate policy that says everyone needs a background check, and if you have a felony, you can't work here. Worker co-ops can make their own rules and can decide like, we are not going to care about people's history of incarceration. We're not going to look at it. We're not going to think about it. They can decide we're going to proactively try to employ people who've been formerly incarcerated because those are people who need jobs, and we have the capacity to provide employment. I think also sort of going back to the peer networking piece, co-ops are a place where people can learn a lot of skills. And so I think co-ops can be used both to like create employment for formerly incarcerated people, but also can be used, so that can be a permanent thing, right? Like you come into the co-op and like, that's the rest of your life. But it can also be a stepping stone of like, you gain a bunch of skills, you build an employment history, which we know that lots of employers want to see your employment history, and then can work somewhere else if you decide that you don't want to stay at that co-op, or you can start your own co-op. I think that's another big potential, is like starting a business is not something that most of us are encouraged to do, but certainly a lot of people who've been incarcerated are not encouraged to do that. But a co-op is a way to do that that doesn't require like just one person. Right? It requires multiple people. So you automatically have more skill sets, more access to resources, more opportunity for success. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. I think to me, like a really important first step is to really be encouraging worker co-ops to proactively look to people who've been incarcerated to offer positions. Especially if there are like, I think something that becomes complicated is that depending on the co-op and depending on the sector that they're in, there are sometimes barriers, right? That like, I know that some of the home care co-ops have struggled because you need certain certifications, and those are state certifications, and the state has limits on who can become certified. But in areas where there aren't those kinds of certifications, like I think there's a lot of co-ops that could really proactively work with, especially with like at least in Madison, there's organizations that are working with people who have been recently incarcerated, and trying to help them find employment. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for co-ops to work with those kinds of community organizations to like say like, yeah, our co-op is totally open to people who've been incarcerated recently. You know, here's what we're looking for. We're looking for like, are you willing to show up? Are you willing to engage? Are you willing to learn things? Like those are the things we're looking for. We're not looking at like, what have you done in the past that may be something that other places look at and say, oh, you can't work here. So that's something that I would love to encourage more co-ops to do, is really think about how they can be like provide employment to people who struggle to find employment, whether that's people who've been incarcerated or a whole lot of other people too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap in all the different categories of people who have struggles with employment, right? There's like incarceration, there's mental health, there's like homelessness, there's like a lot of things that overlap. So sometimes it's hard to like tease out like what the actual piece is, but
yeah, in Chicago, there, well, I'll just say in general, even people who are innocent of charges that are innocent of convictions, have a hard time getting over that. Like right now in Chicago, there are people who were tortured under under Burge, and a lot of them are still in prison. Like it doesn't matter that the government recognizes that they were tortured to confess to a crime that they didn't commit. They're still living with the consequences. These opportunities to create work for people who are formerly incarcerated are really important. And you know, I'm talking to some people who are incarcerated, and the example like Chai Fresh Kitchen in Chicago, I think is something that people should know about. And yeah, Chai Fresh Kitchen, these are people who are formerly incarcerated. The majority of the workers, I believe, are formerly incarcerated, if not all of them. And maybe if no one in Madison knows about that, maybe that might, you know, get some people interested to learn about that. And it seems they're very successful. Last year or the year before, within a year of them starting, they already purchased a building. They started at something called the Hatchery in Chicago, and after maybe about a year, they were so successful that they're able to purchase a building on the other side of town, in South Side. And I went there for the groundbreaking ceremony. It's pretty exciting. While they're having the ceremony, I was explaining to neighbors on the street what it is, and there's like this genuine enthusiasm among people because it clicked. Like this isn't a regular business coming in. They're like, this is what our communities really need. They're really excited about this idea of like, oh, all the workers own the company, you know, all them. But one thing that comes to mind, that I'm wondering if something similar exists in Madison, in Wisconsin, and if not, it's probably good homework for anybody over there. There's this clinic in Chicago. It falls under the UIC John Marshall Law School, and it's called the Community Enterprise and Solidarity Economic Clinic. And they informed me a few years ago that in the state of Illinois, that there's actually state law that people who are incarcerated can actually continue operating a business that they had prior to being incarcerated. This is at least in the state prisons. This is in the state prisons. I don't believe it applies to federal prisons or county. I don't know if it would affect the county incarceration at the county level. And that workers and people who are incarcerated can also start new businesses while behind bars. When I found out about this, I started asking people whom I write, like, hey, have you heard about this? And a few prisoners actually had, but they were unable to make use of that. And they weren't thinking about this in cooperative frameworks, but they did try to make use of that. But the warden basically shot down all their requests. Anybody who had tried it, the wardens had shot down the request. And so I had communicated this to the clinic, and they're saying, well, maybe we just gotta like lobby or campaign or find some way to change who's in control of that decision of whether a person decides to form a business behind bars or continue a business behind bars. And there's nothing that suggests that these couldn't be worker cooperative businesses. And I suspect though that one of the big things is the government doesn't want its monopoly challenge, all these different monopolies in these different industries where the workers are basically working for free. Yeah, they don't want that stuff challenged, but it has to be challenged, in my opinion. Whether the prisons are going to exist tomorrow or not, I think it's really important for people to have access to their labor on, closer and closer to their own terms. But yeah, if y'all make any headway, if it turns out there's similar laws in Wisconsin or wherever, whoever's listening about this, and anybody makes headway, I think let us know. We all are, I think, very curious to see how we can develop worker co-ops behind bars, because they're definitely going to help people who, after they get out, they can have these businesses already set up and they continue working on the outside. It's going to reduce recidivism. And the way I see it, because some people are behind bars not because they harmed peaceful society. The way I see it, some people are behind bars because they didn't have a community to defend them from the government or from predatory elements of society. And developing those relationships, I think, makes people stronger and more immune to any sort of predatory behavior that oftentimes I think is what gets people in prison. It's like just vulnerable people who didn't have anybody help them out. Yeah, that's my spiel on that.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that kind of law existed, and I'll have to figure out if we have something like that here. But that definitely seems like it opens up, like you're saying, like a lot of possibility, but then also there's sort of like the gatekeeping aspect of wardens. And so I feel like there's always that question of like, how do we change a system that we want to be gone? But in the meantime, like, how do we change it to at least be a system that doesn't rely on like perpetuating itself, right? That like right now there's a lot of incentive to put people back in prison again because of the labor, like it's right, like it makes sense as a warden, right? Like why would you want people to like have their own business that they could leave and not come back and work for free? And I don't know how to change that piece, but yeah, that's a really interesting law though, because that would really open up a lot of possibilities for people, especially to be able to have meaningful employment, like sort of already set up. Because I think that's another big thing, like what you were talking about, Chris, about like community support, is that like co-ops aren't just, for the most part, co-ops aren't just like another job, right? Like you do have support built in, partially because you own it together. And so you kind of need to provide support to each other because, if something happens to one person, it affects everyone else. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of possibility there. But yeah, changing that part of the system is hard, for sure.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to think about because like the energy that you put into maybe lobbying or something, what would happen if you put that energy into other places? Could you get a lot of people out sooner? It's hard. I mean, a lot of the prisoner support that I see, I don't see any like mass release happening anytime soon. There was an opportunity during the pandemic, some saw it for like Illinois, but nobody really worked on it. So in the meantime, these types of reforms, they might be very meaningful. So
I mean, I would love to say that like we won't have a prison system at some point, but it's really hard to imagine having no prison system. So the more we can do to make it something that is like temporary and like not something that like follows people for the rest of their lives seems like an important step, right? That like even if we do have incarceration, like making it something that's like, yes, this thing happened, you do this thing, and then you have a life beyond that where you have support and community and economic opportunity, and not just like a endless cycle of being forced back into incarceration for like minor infractions of overly strict parole restrictions and stuff like that.
Yeah, reduce the footprint.
So I think we ran through everything we wanted to talk about. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, Rek?
Let's see. I guess I would want to talk a little bit about our upcoming trade school class, because I think that connects to a lot of the things we've talked about. So the first rendezvous was in March 2020, literally the day before everything shut down. One of the things that was talked about a lot there was education, and how like MadWorc's president has, I don't remember if it's a coworker or a friend, but knows somebody who went through the business school at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. And apparently in like the like stacks and stacks and stacks of books, the word co-op or like the concept of co-ops comes up like once or twice in the context of housing co-ops. So we were talking a lot about education and like the lack of education about cooperatives. Like if business students aren't learning about cooperatives, then like how are we expecting people who aren't in business realm to learn about cooperatives? And we talked about some of the like existing education, some of the gaps in education, and people felt like, and this is a group of folks mostly from Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And the sort of gap that people identified that seemed sort of like the most logical place to start was trade schools. Because people in trade schools are learning a trade, they're going to be going into a particular industry, often working for somebody else. And that creates a really good opportunity to actually start your own business as a cooperative. And you have a topic to start with, right? It's not like, you know, if you start with like 4-year undergrad, they're like, I don't know what my business would be. Like, what do I know how to do? Like, whereas with like trade school students, they're like, oh yes, I am learning how to be an electrician. I could open a co-op that does electrician. So we have been working on a curriculum. We got funding from the Cooperative Development Foundation. And as part of that funding, once it's fully completed and once we've taught it and revised it and like it's really done, it will be publicly available to anyone who wants to use it. But we're basically doing a pilot this fall that we work with our local trade school. It's very hard to get a class added into the trade school that's for credit. And part of the like stipulations were like they would own the curriculum. We're like, okay, but if you knew how to do a curriculum about cooperatives, you'd already be doing it. So like, I think we have more subject matter experience than you do. So we're running it through the professional and continuing education program, which is not for credit, but is open to everyone in the city, which is great because we're also hoping that it might be an opportunity for people who are interested in converting their existing businesses to co-ops to take it, as well as for trade school students to take it. Plus, there's a lot of people who have gone to those co-op 101s that the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition has done who might be interested in more hands-on support. So it's a very hands-on class. And we'll take people basically through like, why would you start a co-op, including just some of the like economic realities of our world, right? Like, here's what income inequality looks like, and here's why that's a problem. But then also walk people through like democratic decision making and bylaws and finances and funding and business planning. And so basically people will leave the class with like, they'll leave with bylaws, they'll leave with a decision-making process, they'll leave with a list of questions that they want to ask a lawyer if they decide to go that route. Not all co-ops will have legal questions, but some will. And they'll leave with a business plan. So they'll basically be working in small groups to create those things. And we're hoping that people in the same industry will take the class together and actually form co-ops out of it. And I think that's another opportunity that I think could connect to co-ops for folks who are incarcerated, because I know there are some states where people who are incarcerated can take classes at like outside colleges. And so I think that's a potential connection there, is like, if a trade school is offering a class like that, that might be a really strong opportunity for business development skills for someone who is able to take classes. I know that's not true everywhere, but I think that's a big opportunity. And I think it's also just a really exciting project, because we haven't had anything like that in Madison that really like walks people step by step through creating a cooperative. And like, we did a lot of research into what other classes exist, and there's a lot of like classes that are sort of like survey of cooperatives, but not like, here's how you start a cooperative. So that's a big project that we are hoping is happening this fall. We're currently waiting for registration to pick up. We're going to do it one way or another. We're just hoping that it'll be through the trade school and not on our own.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's definitely needed in the Illinois state prisons. I don't think something like that exists yet. So if anybody's doing that in Illinois, let us know. I'd be interested in supporting making that happen, because they really need that in the prisons. Like, just the idea of more just more cooperation and stuff, because it's very hyper individualistic. But the prisons also foster that mentality of pitting people against each other. And if you weren't hyper individualistic before you went into prison, well, the prison likely fostered that in you, and that just makes our societies worse. But that's exciting, and yeah, I do want to see that sort of like open sourced, or I don't know a better term.
Chris and I have both worked also in workforce development, where we've I think both kind of tried to shoehorn in some cooperative principles and exposure. So having a ready-made curriculum would be just a huge boon to just facilitate that. Someone who believes in it and doesn't really know the nuts and bolts of how would be super valuable.
Yeah. Well, and to respond to what Chris was saying about like the hyper individualism, I think that's probably a big part of why wardens don't want people starting their own businesses, because it's empowering to people. And if they started cooperative businesses, like, goodness knows, like, that would destroy a lot of the hierarchy that exists. And yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of entrenched like dependence on that power structure. But yeah, once the curriculum is ready, I will definitely keep you both posted, and we'll happily talk to people about like how to implement it, what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah, that power control. I don't know if we'll put this in the video, but I was talking to someone yesterday about we're trying to understand some tensions that are going on in Logan Prison. This is in Illinois. One of the things that we do in prisoner support is we're always trying to make sense of people's experiences to figure out next moves, and what is the prison doing, what are the wardens doing, what's on their mind, the correctional officers and stuff. And so we're trying to, there was there's one of the persons were writing who was asking us for help. They were saying basically that there's a hierarchy in there, and that's pitting people against each other.
Mhm.
And some folks are saying like, nah, that doesn't make sense. I was like, no, these hierarchies do make sense. And I was explaining something that I was recently reading about, and that said, like in the 1920s or so, maybe a little bit before, there's a Fort Leavenworth prison in Kansas, which is a place that a lot of political prisoners were sent. There's this moment where there were workers of the industrial workers of the world, unionists, but the industrial workers of the world, they're confined there. And then there was a Black insurrectionist. They were confined there. And then there was a Mexican revolutionaries. They were confined there. And then somehow the national legislators of the U.S. government found out that there wasn't segregation going on. And they were like really upset. They're like, what? You have people just like getting along with each other, different races? Like, what are you doing over there? And so they made sure to change the system so that basically all the people from different racial backgrounds were pitted against each other. So yeah, I mean, the different ways in which we get pitted against each other, and it's a lot of times not accidental, it's engineered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's super critical, like that it's not a natural system at all. Like it is very intentional, and the people in power are very aware of it. Like it's not like somebody was just like, oh, what happens if we do? No, it's like we're gonna put people in positions that make them fight each other so that they don't fight us. Like which means that people do have a lot of power, right? Like the people in charge would not be so scared if there wasn't a lot of power potential in people getting along and working together.
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about like, it would be cool to make a play out of that, like piece of history, but one in which we win.
Yeah, I just read the book Caste, and in it she talks about I think it might have been World War I, that Black American soldiers in Europe were like getting along with their European allies, and their European allies were like, you know, praising them when they did heroic things, and, you know, just like treating them as people. And American, like, I don't know what the titles were, but like American like generals or like higher up people basically talked to their counterparts in the other European groups and were like, your men need to stop being friendly with our African American soldiers. Like it's ruining morale among our troops to see Black people being treated as like real people and being praised and like being put in leadership positions. So yeah, it's really conscious. Like it's not just like just happens that way. It's like people actually are putting this into effect and saying like, we need to make these divisions and maintain these divisions, otherwise our system of racism doesn't work. So anything we can do to fight that is huge.
Yeah, and in case anyone's interested, these Black insurrectionists that I referred to, they're connected to it was the all-Black 24th Infantry Regiment of the United States Army, and this is connected to the Houston riot of 1917. Basically, they got fed up of racism. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover, Rek? That was the trade school information. I'm really glad you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, partially it's just like very on my mind because our enrollment deadline is in 2 days and the class starts in 9 days. And so like, it's like all I'm thinking about right now is like, how many flip charts do I need? How many sticky notes?
Are you teaching?
I am not teaching. Charity, who's one of our board members and who's the staff person for the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition, is teaching. But I'm doing all of the administrative support and a lot of the curriculum development. So right now, like I've done a lot of curriculum development, and now we're sort of working together to make it something that she can teach.
Cool.
Yeah. And we're really trying to use like as much popular education as possible. Like our first meeting, she was like, do I need a PowerPoint for this? And I was like, oh, please no. Like, let's like maybe some of the like reading financial statement stuff will require a PowerPoint, you know, just to be like, everyone look at this one thing and we're going to like point out things, but like, no, we're going to be as interactive as possible. Like, because people are going to learn from each other too. Like,
yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying about how it's actually difficult to have hybrid experiences that aren't totally like, I don't know, like centralizing in the voice and like propping up some kind of hierarchy. Yeah, it just always takes like a little more work to like remind ourselves and like fight the infrastructures that just assume there's going to be one voice in the room. So yeah, good on you.
I mean, it's kind of important too, if we want people to be forming co-ops, like they need to be learning from each other too, because like we're not going to be there all the time to like give them information as they come up against struggles. Like, I mean, that's why like we're spending like a whole like week and a half on democratic decision making, because it's something people are just not familiar with. Like, but
I would like to tune in.
So critical.
Yes.
Like, you're not going to succeed as a co-op if you can't make decisions.
Yeah, it's astounding the extent to which like basic empowering ideas have been like eliminated from our communities and humanity in general, to the point where Mike Strode, you should probably know, calling that cooperative and very involved in the solidarity economy. We were having a reflection. He was thinking like, you know what? Just introducing the idea to our neighbors that you could have control in the organization that you're in. Just introducing that idea is a really important achievement for people. Just think about that, like, hey, how could that could exist in my community? And it's as sad as a reflection as it is kind of I guess a little hopeful, because people are like running with it, the idea, like that's just turn on that light for people, you know, because in Chicago, as much as like it seems like, because there's worker unions and a lot of active involvement, as much as it seems that there would be a lot of like self-management and democracy in our communities, there really isn't, in my opinion. There's that rhetoric, there's a whole industry of that rhetoric, but at the grassroots, we don't experience that much democracy or meaningful participation in things that impact us.
Yeah, I mean, even like coming up with like what the first week is going to be for this class has been really interesting. Of like, you know, Madison's worker co-ops are historically a lot whiter than the sort of like national norm, and a lot more male, but definitely a lot whiter. Some of which is about Madison's demographics traditionally. And a lot of the newer co-ops are less white. But we have sort of this like multi-generational set of co-ops. And also we have like a very hippie white food co-op that people know. And so even just trying to come up with like, how do we explain to people why co-ops are relevant to them, when like maybe their only experience of a co-op is like the overpriced hippie grocery store. And so we were trying to come up with like a list of just like, we like didn't want to bring up the phrase solidarity economy in the first class. We're like, that's like a little too far. Like, how do we like get people there a little more slowly? But we came up with a list of just like things people do that are like part of solidarity economics, So like one of the examples was just like potlucks, like
Mhm.
libraries, just like things that people do that really are about community building and everyone contributing and everyone participating, but that we don't usually talk about as part of this stuff. Like we're usually like very focused on like bigger things. So yeah, it's been interesting trying to come up with like, how do we in 1 week convince people that this is in fact relevant to what they already know and already do. Yeah.
Well, Rek, thank you so much. This has been a really lovely conversation, and I'm excited also. Just the number of like projects that you have your fingers in right now are all just so exciting, and to also like understand how interconnected they all are. Like I feel like just a much greater sense of like, okay, like there are all these like disparate things happening, but there's actually like movement in the same direction. Which is just like a really kind of hopeful feeling that I'm left with at the end of this chat.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm happy if there's people in other places who are interested in talking about forming co-op networks and peer networks. I'm totally happy to talk with folks. Our website is MadWorc, MadWorc.org. And I would say that basically anyone from MadWorc is always happy to talk about how we started, the kinds of things we've done, how we've connected to other labor movements. I think everyone is really committed to the value of cooperatives working together. And I know that that's something that can be hard to get off the ground. So always happy to talk with people who are like maybe in a place where there's only 1 or 2 co-ops about how to get started.
Awesome. Chris, do you have any final words?
No, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It was a hard fought interview. Yeah, we had to fight for this one. It was worth it. Definitely. That's how it is though. I'm glad that we struggled for to make it happen.
Mhm. We're busy doing stuff, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what my response is when somebody asks me what I'm doing. I tell them stuff.
It's just true.
Yeah. Always more stuff. Well, thank you both for having me join you. It's been lovely.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Chicago is not that far from Madison, so I am very certain that we could get a group of people to take a field trip to Chicago at some point if people wanted to like either do some like cross-state organizing, talk about like strategies for local organizing. Like we've definitely gone up to like Stephen's Point to do things like that in the past, or even just to do like co-op tours and check out others co-ops and see what's going on in different places. Like
it'd be fun.
All right, Gromke and I are here. We're going to be experimenting with announcements. It's kind of sometimes a little bit tricky to keep up with what's going on in Illinois and abroad in the worker cooperative community, as well as in the prisoner support community. So hopefully this will be of value to people.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're gonna go through about 6 major topics for our announcements. And Gromke, if you want to talk about Cooperation Jackson, I'll let you dig into that. And let me see. I'll probably share a screen if you want me to, or maybe we can both.
That's fine. I'm on my phone. I don't have anything to share that way. But well, if people are unaware, Jackson, Mississippi has been going through a little bit of a water crisis. Not a little bit. but critical portions of Jackson have flooded and have incapacitated the water treatment facilities there. And because of that, the entire city is without drinking water. I don't know if you've seen videos on Twitter or elsewhere about how that water looks like, but it has the consistency of Pepsi and the same coloration too. The state is asking people not to drink it, not to bathe in it, not to cook with it, but they're even saying not to put out fires with it, which makes me wonder how polluted this water is.
Yeah, and on the Cooperation Jackson Twitter, it says that the link to donate at is cooperationjackson.org/donate.
Yes. You can hyperlink it. I guess the next point would be events and meetings. Correct?
Yeah.
Did you want to take that over, or are we going to do piece by piece?
Is there, yeah, Chicago Co-op Convergence, what's the latest? I know that usually this year Chicago Co-op Convergence was meeting on the last Wednesday of the month, but for September, they're actually going to be rolling that into the Co-op Ed Center's 4th anniversary party, which we'll get to in a bit. But I think Chicago Co-op Convergence is gonna be changing when they meet. And in case nobody's heard of this, this is a digital space in Chicago. There's been some physical. I think there's been one physical meetup where all types of co-ops can get together to talk about peer support, get help, announce themselves. Yeah, they might be getting a website soon, so as soon as that website comes up, we'll put a link to it. But yeah, reach out to us if you're trying to connect to the Chicago Co-op Convergence and you can't get access to it. They also do have a listserv, and if we don't put the website up, then we should put the listserv up. And if there are any special instructions, we'll try to include that. Now we're moving on to the reflection circle. We don't have any like an email yet for that, but just want to put on people's calendar, or rather put on people's radar. There's a reflection circle that's happening for people to that's co-op friendly, that's worker co-op friendly. This is a place for people to just talk about these things. There aren't too many of these informal spaces in Chicago for people to talk about worker co-ops, and it's been going on virtually and in Little Village. And as soon as we get more details, we're gonna put that on. But they've been meeting sometimes once a month, so we just want people to know that it exists. And this one's a bilingual. It's striving to be a bilingual space, Spanish and English. Moving forward, there is a fellow named Colin who's trying to set up a separate worker co-op study space, ideally one that it can just be virtual for people to come together, including people who are like pro-prisoner, who want to talk about how to develop worker co-ops in a way that's pro-prisoner. And if anybody wants to inquire about how to hold down that space, develop that space with Colin, you can email theblast@protonmail.com.
The Co-op Ed Center's 4th anniversary party is coming up. I need to click this link. So the Co-op Center's 4th anniversary party will be on September 24th of this year at 3000 North Lakeshore Drive, West Chicago, Illinois, 60657. Tickets are $50 to $100.
This is a fundraiser. Oh, but check it out. It says that there is a different ticket level, lower one. It's a community. It's $25.
You're right. I see early bird $50, but that deadline has already passed, I believe. Collaborators at 75 and builders at 100.
Yeah, so it looks like if you email them, you can get a lower price tickets. I heard that the tool library is going to show up, as well as the Pilsen Housing Cooperative is going to show up. I don't know who else is going to show. Oh, well, we have the Chicago Co-op Convergence. They're going to show up. So that's going to be interesting. It's like I guess the informal solidarity economy summit of for Chicago for 2022.
This is important. I'm glad I could see this. Looks like they have everything. Open bar, food's coming, live music, maybe.
Yeah, if you want to go, dude, maybe we should pay for your ticket. I'll be gone. I'll probably be gone by then. The email for the getting that ticket discount is at coopedcenter@gmail.com.
Okay. On a national level, Firestorm Books was trying to run a fundraiser, and they succeeded. They met their goal. I wish them the best. Firestorm Books itself is situated in Asheville, North Carolina. It is a worker-owned and self-managed anti-capitalist business. And as you might imagine, they emphasize books, coffee, and community. I think they've been featured a lot on the Channel Zero network. So that is also a place you guys can learn about more about this business, anti-capitalist business, I should say.
I'm looking at Firestorm's Facebook page at their events, and it says that they have a few events coming up. Firestorm is going to have 3 events, online events in September this month. They're all going to be at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. And yeah, so one is going to be on September 15th. The next is going to be on September 22nd. And the third is going to be on September 29th. Yeah, it looks like they're going to be discussing different texts. These look like really good books. You want to do this announcement?
Conversations with Game Changers will take place monthly on the second Saturday of each month on Zoom, with simultaneous interpretation in Arabic, English, French, Kurdish, Punjabi, Spanish, and Turkish. Let's see, on October 8th, 2022, there will be a Boria Jin, which is about the Women's Economy Committee in Northeast Syria, Rojava. Following that, there will be a conversation about grassroots liberation from Nairobi, Kenya. That's on November 12th on 2022. After this, there will be the Zameen Prapti Sangar Committee in Punjab, and that's on January 14th in 2023. Lastly, comes Guerrilla Translation, taking place in Spain on February 11th, 2023. This will be about creating a cooperative economy for activist translators.
So we're kind of delving into this on the fly. This is like our rare opportunity to catch up on some of this stuff ourselves. So
Does all look sick though?
yeah, so the grassroots, the November 12th one is going to be about growing people power in the ghettos of Nairobi. And then the January 14th one will be about mobilizing Dalit.
Dalit landless farmers to reclaim their rights to common land. This is something that's kind of disturbing me as a Punjabi itself, is that like you see a lot of the class system that's supposed to be taken away via Sikhism rearing its ugly head again. So the people who claim to follow a faith that's supposed to be dissolving the caste system are upholding it. And the darkest people, Dalits, untouchables, as they're often known, are being robbed of their lands, being robbed of their labor, and essentially just left to be cheated. And I think it's terrible.
For prisoner support in Chicago, there's Chicago IWOC's Chicago Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee. They have virtual meetings from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. every Friday, And these are spaces where like other abolitionists or prisoner supporters can drop in, whether you've never done prisoner support before and you want to learn how to do it, or people who are already pretty steep in the work as abolitionists and they're looking for ways to build cooperation of different prisoner support groups, across organizations. Then there's and so we're going to drop a link to a sign up form for anybody who wants to get involved in Chicago IWOC's phones apps as well, or or for people who want to do a little bit more and commit to getting more involved in Chicago IWOC. But yeah, if people want to join in on those meetings, send them an email, sign up, and sign up form that we're going to drop a link to. Then there's our friends in Indiana Department of Corrections Watch. If you know anybody in Indiana who's an abolitionist who does prisoner support, wants to get involved with some cool people, Indiana DOC Watch is a group that's been around for a while that is important to link up with. And here's their link tree. But definitely get in touch with them or recommend to anybody who's in Indiana who wants to do prisoner support work. In Chicago and suburbs, there's also a new organization forming of people directly impacted by electronic monitoring. It looks like their name is going to be Free Us. So if you know anybody who is on electronic monitoring or who is going to be on electronic monitoring, such as a condition of them leaving prison, stay tuned and we will provide information as it comes in about how to connect with them. So we moving on to work opportunities.
Oh, this includes remote work as well.
Yeah, maybe we could just focus on the remote work and any open job work opportunities that are in the Midwest. The URL is usworker.coop/jobs.
I searched remote under the keyword. I'm seeing 3 jobs. The first one is under the Samara Collective, and that is as a web designer and a strategist. This is a full-time position that was posted 3 weeks ago. Second one is a loan officer under the Shared Capital Cooperative. This is situated in St. Paul, Minnesota, and is also full-time. Last is the weekend supervisor in Brooklyn, New York, in Green Hill Food Co-op.
Did you mention this one? The software engineer position is part-time. It's remote with common good.
No, I mentioned the web design position under Samara Collective, which is a remote position.
Okay.
How much does a loan officer make anyway?
All right. So the other positions that I see that are open in the Midwest is they're both for the Hub Bike Co-op. They're both full-time in Minneapolis, Minnesota. One position is used area co-coordinator. The other is small parts steward.
Okay.
We're moving on to Chai Commons. Chai Commons says that any work opportunities with them, paid or not, are going to be found on their website at the URL chaicommons.coop/get-involved in one section that's called Put Me to Work, Share Your Skills, and We'll Seek Opportunities. And here you can see some of the skills that they're looking for. And then they're making a push for people to join Chai Commons as an owner, as a way to get involved in doing work. It says, we currently have 2 types of owners, consumer owners and worker owners. Both owner classes govern our cooperative and make key decisions via consensus. Each owner gets 1 vote. Every owner is automatically a consumer owner that selects the board and votes on cooperative-wide issues. In addition, worker owners have the protection of a worker cooperative form for limited liability. Worker owners get paid for their billable work and can use our enterprise software tools. All right, moving forward. Let's look at some of the resources that are available. We're going to talk about Crossroads Fund, what kind of resources is accessible in many parts of Illinois and some parts of Indiana as well. The reason why we're mentioning Crossroads Fund is because they've already proven to be very important to the worker cooperative and abolitionist ecosystem. So yeah, they give out grants to people doing these types of work. You can get thousands of dollars. Let's say you want to build a worker co-op, but you want to have a nonprofit component to it. There's a important chance that you can get money from Crossroads Fund. Gromke, did you want to talk about some of the grants that are available as mentioned on the calendar?
Yeah, for this year, the grants calendar 2022 to 2023, I'm seeing 6 of these. So first comes the Technical Assistance Fund, which opens on August 5th of 2022. The deadline is of this month, September 26th of 2022. Access code technical, all caps. Description provided is the Technical Assistance Fund supports specific technical assistance needs of smaller organizations. This grant's program focuses on projects that reach beyond the group's ongoing work to build the organization's internal capacity. The maximum grant in this program is $5,000. The next fund is the Critical Response Fund, which opens on August 5th, and the deadline is November 14th of this year. So the last one, Critical Response Fund, August 5th, and deadline November 14th. The Critical Response Fund provides rapid response grants to organizations working on issues that arise due to the current political moment. Applicants may request between $3,000 and $10,000. All right, next is the Youth Fund, which opens on September 12th. Applications open September 12th, and the deadline is from October 26th. The Youth Fund for Social Change provides resources to youth activists working to change and challenge existing policies and/or organized structures that prevent their communities from achieving equality. Grant amounts are between $3,000 to $15,000, depending on the size of the project and what it will cover. Next is the Seed Fund, which opens at January 9th, 2023. The Seed Fund supports new, emerging, and small community-based organizations that are actively engaged in social change work. Funding is provided for general operating, startup costs, or project expenses. The maximum grant in this program is $15,000. They reopened the Technical Assistance Fund from January 9th to February 6th, rather than the previous deadlines of August 5th to September 26th, 2022. And the Critical Response Fund opens again from January 9th to May 22nd of 2023, rather than the previous dates of August 5th to November 14th. Done and done.
Yeah, so definitely apply to these. If you can definitely, yeah, check to see if you can get access to the application months ahead of time, whether it's through Crossroads Fund or somebody who's applied for these grants in the past, and start working on them ahead of time. That way you're not that way you can actually practice democracy and consensus in your organization to fill it out, and it doesn't become a miserable thing that you're trying to do at the last second to meet the deadline. There's also the Chicago Racial Justice Pooled Fund.
Yeah, I'll just read it. The Chicago Racial Justice Pool Fund will raise and move at least $10 million over 4 years to Chicago organizations building and sustainment movements for justice that centers Black lives and addresses anti-Blackness directly. The fund provides unrestricted grants to nonprofits that are Black-led and use grassroots community organizing as a primary strategy. Ally-led community organizing groups addressing anti-Blackness are also considered. Community organizing in this context means building movements and collective power to dismantle the systems, structures, and institutions that are rooted in white supremacy and perpetuate anti-Black violence. The fund reviews applications on a rolling basis. As funds are available, requests are to be for general operating support, and the grants will range between 25K to 50K. And they have to have these 5 points applying to them. So they have to be organizing community-based, they have to be Black-led or allied organizations working on anti-Blackness, they have to be located in Cook County, and they have to have an annual organized budget of less than 750K, and are designated 501c3 by IRS to have a fiscal sponsor. That's a very tricky point. That last one, you have to be a 501c3. Aren't there many hoops to become something like that, if I'm correct?
So, well, or have a fiscal sponsor. So,
Or have a fiscal sponsor, yes.
yeah.
The fund will also consider organizations without 501c3 designations that have an organizational bank account. Okay, that's very forgiving. I
Huh.
thought that's not so bad. Maybe I should talk to some people in yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so Crossroads Fund also, well, Lizette of Crossroads Fund recommended that I also mention the Giving Project. And the Giving Project is a 6-month participatory grant-making program intended to sharpen fundraising skills, popular education, and analysis while organizing donors to move money to grassroots groups. I've always wanted to be part of this. I hope one day I will, because in the Giving Project, you're able to view all these groups that are applying for Crossroads Fund grants and to have conversations about how to share the money. That's my understanding. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, it looks like I really hope to do it one day, because I want to see all these groups,
Yeah. You want to be able to see en masse, like what trajectory people are aiming at.
Yeah, the broader liberatory ecosystem in Chicago, like a lot of us, we only get to see a small fraction of it. And it's not just Chicago, sorry. It's parts of Illinois and parts of Indiana.
Right.
So if you know anybody who's interested in being part of the Giving Project, hit Crossroads up. The last resource that we'll mention today is just the local time bank, Colanut Collaborative. If you've never done any time banking, look them up. It's colanutcollab.org, KOLANUTCOLLAB.org. Yeah, we have a time bank for Chicago, people who want to help each other out without money being the direct relationship in the exchange process.
On the matter of strikes, there are meaningful prospects for a national railroad strike. The news is changing every day. Many railroad workers do want to strike. A national strike by railroad workers could catalyze much of the working class movement in the United States. To get latest updates, visit Railroad Workers United and sign up for their newsletter. We'll put a link in the description.